Welcome to the Biblical Leadership at Work podcast. I am your host, Jason Woodard. On this month's episode, we will meet Nate Miersma, a leader whose career spans both military and corporate leadership. Nate served in the U.S. Army for 11 years, including time as a company commander with combat deployments. After his military service, he transitioned into the corporate world, spending nearly 20 years at Stryker in leadership roles across strategic sales, marketing, and operations. I had the privilege of working alongside Nate for several years at Stryker, and I found him to be a strong, confident leader that I highly respect. Nate is a devoted Christian who integrates his faith into his leadership. He values integrity, transparency, and a deep commitment to his team's well-being, striving to be an advocate for their personal and professional growth. With a leadership style built on faith, high standards, and a passion for people, Nate is a fantastic example of what it means to lead with biblical principles in the workplace, and I'm excited for our conversation today. Nate, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you, Jason. It was a nice intro. I'm excited to be here.
Good. Excited to have you. Hey, as we always do, let's start off and tell us, the introduction hit a little bit of your background, but can you walk us through, kind of talk about from your education, university education, on through your career history, what God has done through you and how he's taken you to where you are right now?
Well, God has taken me over, under, around, and through in my career. So I guess I'll start with a little story. I'm not 100% certain why I wanted to be an engineer at first, but I started my education at Purdue. And like many young college kids who were moved out of the house for the first time and raised in a conservative Christian home, those first couple of years were wilder than necessary. And I wasn't living the life that was honoring to God. And candidly, I wasn't enjoying my education. And about 2 years in to my time there, I just woke up one day and said, you know what? I'm not becoming the person that I know that I'm meant to be. And I don't think I want to be an engineer. And I didn't pray about it, nor did I call my parents, but I called an Army recruiter. And he came to my fraternity house, and a week later, I wound up being sworn in. I enlisted in the Army Reserve, actually. And so halfway through college, oh, by the way, but before I get there, then I called my parents and said, "Hey, guess what?
Let them know.
I don't want to be an engineer anymore. I'm leaving Purdue," and I joined the Army. And you could hear a pin drop on the call for a little while. So thankfully, they were supportive after they realized they didn't really have a choice. And so I went away to basic training, and thankfully I had the presence of mind at the time to join the reserves because I knew I wanted to finish college. So I went away to basic training and military police school after that, and I moved back to Kalamazoo after that, my hometown. And I was fresh out of the Army with a bald head, and I thought I wanted to kick down doors, and I wanted to be an FBI agent or something like that. And so I transferred my credits to Western Michigan University and enrolled in their sociology and criminal justice program. And by the time I was a semester away from graduating from Western, I already had a job offer from Stryker because I had gotten a temporary job there earlier in the year.
Okay.
And so I don't know, maybe 30 days in, they said, "Hey, we really like you. We'd love you to stay." And so I sort of got this amazing job at this great company in my hometown. Really just by the grace of God and nothing else. And so in April of 2023, I graduated from college. I got hired into Stryker full time. I got commissioned as an officer because during that time at Western, I'd also enrolled in their ROTC program after getting a phone call. And I got married to my wife, Danielle. And so it was a big month. And from there, it was crazy. So I wound up getting orders almost immediately because 9/11 had happened prior to that to Fort Leonard Wood. My wife and I moved down there for a short period of time, and then I got orders directly from there to head to my first deployment in Iraq. And so Danielle came back to Kalamazoo and bought our first house without me ever seeing it. And life started taking crazy turns. And so in between a couple of combat deployments, I came back to Stryker. We had our first baby. And I enrolled in a master's program. I had the presence of mind again to realize that I was probably going to be traveling or deployed quite a bit. And so I enrolled in a program that allowed me to do it remotely. And I wound up getting my master's a couple of years later. And then I was at Stryker for, gosh, I think just about exactly 20 years after that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess from an education and leadership perspective, it was Purdue, then Western, then Colorado Technical University for my master's. Stryker sent me to some great executive education courses that really, I would say I probably learned more from than I did during my master's degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had some really great leadership opportunities along the way.
Yeah. Now you said when you first started, when you got married, that was 2003.
Yeah, it was 2003.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. What made you decide Army? When you're in college, like why the Army? Why the military?
I had no family in the military outside of one uncle who served in the Navy during Vietnam. I just kind of grew up as an outdoorsy kid that liked to hunt and fish and camp, and I just always wanted to join the Army when I was growing up. And I
Okay.
don't know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I knew I didn't want to be on a boat, and I think the only thing that I knew about the military really was that the Army and the Marine Corps train generalists in terms of leaders, and the Air Force and the Navy train specialists. And so you
Okay.
come out of the Army, you'll be a generalist. You come out of one of those other service branches, and you'll be a specialist in something. And I just thought that's the direction that I wanted to go.
Yeah. General leadership. Now, were you in? Was your training in military police when you first went in?
It was,
Okay.
yeah. So I was enlisted as a military police officer, and I reported to a reserve unit actually in Kalamazoo, Michigan, first in Chicago, and then in Kalamazoo. And I deployed with that unit out of Kalamazoo for my first, I don't know, a year and some odd months deployment. And then I got commissioned as an officer, and my branch as an officer was also military police. But oddly enough, my second deployment, I was an infantry company commander. So it just shows you how desperate the Army was getting at the time.
For leaders. I think when you and I met, I want to say I was at Stryker in 2009. I remember my first day at Stryker was Obama's first day in office, which I think was,
Really?
that's just
Yep.
stuck out in my head. So I think that was '09, I think, when he started. And then you were deployed at the time. I didn't know you, didn't know of you. And then within a year or two, you came back to work and we were working together. Is that like 2010 maybe?
Yeah. So my deployments were 2004 into 2005, and then all of 2008. And so if you were started in 2009, I would have been back from my deployment.
Maybe like this.
Yeah.
And did you come back in '09 sometime?
Yeah. Beginning of
Okay.
20. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess it wasn't very long after I started. I remember meeting you, and I don't know why, but I remember it clearly. One of the first times I ever really spoke to you, we were walking across the parking lot between the 6200 and 4201 building. I don't know what we were doing, but we were walking together. It was the first time that I really got to talk to you, and you said you'd, come back from deployment, and you'd worked there before, and, came back, and I was in operations then. I don't remember if that's what you were doing then, operations or not. I can't remember, but
I,
yeah.
let's see. That's second deployment. I went back to operations, and then I went to marketing after that. So yeah.
I do remember like you going over to marketing as I stayed in operations, and yeah, yep. So I remember just the confidence that you brought and your intensity. I loved it. We're both activators, which a lot of people probably don't know what that means, but unless they work around you, then they're like, I don't know about this guy, but he has no patience. He has no patience, and he's always causing chaos. And yeah, he makes decisions with 50% of the information, and that's what activators do. So we connected on that level really quick. So hey, tell us a little bit about your family, Nate. What's the situation that you said married to Danielle? Children, like what's that look like?
I got to put my plug in for my amazing, beautiful best friend and wife, Danielle. I've been married for 21 years. It'll be 22 in April, I think, if I'm doing the math right. And she has been amazing. Obviously, I was deployed for half of the first 5 years we were married. And I left when our firstborn was 5 weeks old, I think, and came back when she was 15 months old. And she's been through a lot, even in career moves, and moving to Arizona to move into sales, then back to Michigan, and much more recently, a move to another company for a leadership role. And so she's been an amazing supporter, and I couldn't do any of it without her. We have 3 kids. So fast forward many years from that firstborn, and we have 2 daughters and a son. My daughter Madeline is 17. She's getting ready to graduate high school. My daughter McKenna is 14. She'll be 15 next month. And my son is a 6th grader. He'll be 12 next month.
Nice. Awesome. And you guys are located in still West Michigan, Kalamazoo area?
Yeah, we're in Vicksburg, Michigan. We live on a little hobby farm. So
Yeah, nice.
married a girl who loved horses, and I
Okay.
did not know what I was getting into. As the guy who's an outdoorsman, I thought I can do this, and so we looked for a really long time. And when we moved back here from Arizona, we found a little hobby farm in Vicksburg. It's on 60 acres actually, and
Wow.
my wife is the hardest working woman I know. She's typically up early in the morning and taking care of horses and other animals, and again in the evening. And my kids have had the privilege of learning responsibility,
Yeah.
chores,
Yeah.
and things like that. And it's been an amazing experience, and one that I wouldn't change for anything.
That's a great environment to raise kids in. Yeah. How many horses do you have?
We own 4, I think. I'm pretty sure we own 4.
It's
Um,
unclear at this moment.
Yeah. And we board a few as well. So there's usually
Yeah.
7 or 8 at our house.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about your faith. How'd you come to know the Lord? What's that look like?
Okay. So I grew up here in West Michigan. I think from the time I was born until I was married, I went to the same church. Went through it, moving to different buildings as it was growing and things like that. But I grew up in the church, in a Reformed church right here in West Michigan called Southridge. If the church was open, we were typically there. And then on top of that, my mom founded a nonprofit here in West Michigan called Love for Children. And so she was kind of working out of the church basement at the time as well. I'm
Yeah.
sure the rent was free. And so I spent a lot of time in the church building, and ran the sound booth and, during
Yeah.
the services and things like that. But, um, I would say I called myself a Christian, but really I just had sort of adopted the label that I had from being raised that way. And it wasn't until we moved to Arizona that that we kind of established our own church family, our own
Yeah.
or church. And
Yeah.
the church that we went to, Christ Church of the Valley, in Arizona, was just incredibly powerful and impactful on me. And it really started to challenge the way that I was thinking about my own faith and relationship with Jesus. And it was then when I made the decision to make that faith my own and really claim Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And
Yeah.
so,
How
Danielle,
old were you? How old were you then, Nate? About.
oh gosh, I would have been, that was just over 10 years ago. So I was probably 33, 34,
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah.
I'm 44
Yeah.
now. Yeah. So Danielle and I got baptized as adults there outside, and fortuitously, my brother and his wife and kids had come down to visit Arizona at the time, so they got to see it, just surreptitiously. And I really, since then, have been on a new journey and had a true relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, praise the Lord for that. And I asked you your age because, we as parents, and I know there's other parents listening, are raising our children in the fear and admonition of the Lord to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And they sometimes don't mature in the faith at a rate that we hope. And sometimes they outright rebel and walk away. And, I think it's important for us. We have to keep praying for them and loving them
Yeah.
and discipling them as much as they'll allow us to. And, maybe they are 34 years old and they're a parent when they all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit wakes them up and they change. So we can't give up.
That's
So
right.
that's why. So that's good. That's good.
Very true.
Go a little bit back on the professional side. What are you doing right now? Talk a little bit about your role now. I know you were a Stryker for a very long time. You worked in a lot of different roles there, but tell us about what you're up to now.
Yeah. So, right about at my 20-year mark at Stryker, I got a text message from a friend of mine, another strong believer, sister in Christ, that just said, "Do you have a moment to chat?" And I knew she had left, several years prior and gone to another company, and just seemed odd, the text and the wording. And so I said, sure. And we wound up talking. She asked if I was interested in learning a little bit more about an opportunity with a company called Conmed out of Florida. And, if I'm honest with you, I'm not sure that I was really that interested, but I said, I really only have one question. Would I have to relocate? And she said, let me get back to you. And so it was less than 24 hours. She came back and said, no, our CEO knows who you are. He knows that, you'll be where the action is, regardless of
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
that is around the United States. And I just started to feel this conviction that I needed to learn more about it. And I'll bring up somebody who's been a mentor to me from a distance for the most part, but Jim Heath. And
Yeah. Absolutely.
Jim had given somebody else advice, and they had shared that advice with me. His name is Derek Babbitt, and Derek had asked Jim if he could go back to, give his 20-year-old self some advice, career advice. What would it be? And one of the things that Jim had shared with him is that, for decades, I got all these calls from recruiters asking if I was interested in learning about another job, and I always just politely declined, and I never even heard him out. And he said I would advise my younger self to take those calls, and either you're going to learn that you're exactly where God wants you to be, and you're going to have more confidence that you're right where you're supposed to be, or you're going to learn about some amazing new opportunity that God's calling you to. Either way, it's not disloyal to
Yeah.
take those phone calls, and it can really be an affirming process. And so I just started to feel this conviction, and I remember that advice, and I felt candidly, I felt almost sick to my stomach, even at the thought of leaving after I'd been there for so long. But the more that I got to know the company, and the more that I got to learn about the man that I was going to report to, Pat, the
Yeah.
more excited I got about the opportunity. And so I just started praying hard about it. And all of a sudden, it was like the weight came off my shoulders, and I realized, wow, I can make a decision. I'll leave this company. It'll be just fine without me, I promise. And I think this is the right thing for my family at this time. And I feel God calling me to do it. And so I now lead the orthopedics division at Conway Corporation. Their office is in Largo, Florida, down on St. Pete. I'll be there next week. But in reality, I spend time wherever I need to be around the country.
Yeah. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
orthopedics division, for those that don't work in or haven't worked in the med tech industry, tell us a little bit about what's the scope of that look like?
Yeah. So ConMed's orthopedic division is really focused on sports medicine. So we serve surgeons who do rotator cuff repair, fix your ACL in your knee or your hip. We sell some capital equipment like the stuff that helps a surgeon do arthroscopic surgery, the camera that goes into your
Yeah.
body so
Okay.
that you
Yep.
see
Yep.
in there. And then we sell power tools that help orthopedic surgeons put total joints in, which I know you're
Yeah.
familiar with.
You and I had some time spending time making parts for those that way and making them. Yeah. So that's a pretty big job. I was super excited to see you get that. I mean, since I first met you, I knew you had tremendous amount of bandwidth in your leadership potential. So congratulations on
Thank you.
that, and really glad. When you were going through that decision process, May, um, what was Danielle's input? Like, what was that conversation like with her? And then in the end, how did that look?
Yeah. Danielle's always been an encourager for me, and so I think sometimes to a fault where I'm like, oh, I'm not that good, I promise. Um, but she just encouraged me to learn a little bit more about it, and she was a sounding board for me when I wanted to talk about things that I was concerned about. But I'd say most important, she's kind of like my chief de-risker, because she would just say, you know what, if this whole thing completely flopped, you'll get another job. It'll be
Yeah.
fine, and it made me feel a little bit more comfortable with
Yeah.
stepping out in faith, and knowing that I had her support and doing it mattered a lot, because
Yeah.
starting a new job also required really rolling my sleeves up and spending a decent amount of time on the road
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get to a new
Yeah.
team.
And that's so important. And that's the reason I asked that so we're the role I'm in now,
Yeah.
when I took this job, I had at the time was in kind of a bad situation, had a new leader come into the organization. The person that hired me was let go.
Yeah.
So new leader came in, was not looking good. So I was starting to look, and I had actually two offers, which was wonderful, but they were
Yeah.
very, very different industries. And I just remember a lot of prayer, speaking to my wife, and then speaking of old mentors from Stryker, Judd Haw, as someone that I think very highly of. I will still reach out to him, and I did on this occasion. So between some advice he had, and then my wife, and some of it, in fact, was going to be, there were some decisions that would impact us as a family on even and financial decisions. You know, there was two different roles and two different pay levels, and the same thing. My wife's always been like, whatever, I want you to be happy and you be able to be successful in either role and supportive. So yeah, what a blessing to have a partner like
Well,
that.
is in any important life decision, my prayer usually sounds like this: God, I'm dumb. Please smack me across the head with a 2x4, slam the door in my face to what I'm
Yeah,
not supposed to do, and open it wide in the other direction, because it's probably the only way I'm gonna recognize which way to
yeah,
go.
yeah,
And then I, leave it up to him. And so it
yeah.
all worked out. It was
Yes,
clear to me.
that's awesome. So hey, big job, a lot of responsibility, probably intense workload. What does your spiritual disciplines look like, Nate, to keep you close to the Lord through all that?
Um, I don't know. You're probably not going to like my answer for the purpose of your podcast, but if I'm honest, I've always felt um, immature in this area, sort of. So I've always sort of felt like I don't measure up, right,
Yeah,
to the people that I spend time with or that I talk to from a faith perspective when it comes to this department. So um, before I really became a Christian and owned my own faith, even then I did devotions here and there. I read the Bible every once in a while and stuff. And in Arizona, we joined a neighborhood group. It was a big enough church and, master plan communities all around the church. And so we joined a small group of people that lived right there in our neighborhood. Um, and I started to really understand spiritual disciplines a little bit more then and the importance of community.
yeah,
But, you know, the things that I want to do daily, it's almost like Paul talks about in the Bible, I still struggle
yes,
to do. And the things that I don't want to do, I do. And
yes,
so I don't know, maybe I should be easier on myself in this area, but it's not really the way that I'm wired. So I'd say I try to spend time in the Bible every morning, and I fail miserably. Sometimes I spend a lot of time, sometimes I spend a little bit of time, and sometimes I completely miss it and forget. Um, and the same thing with prayer. Sometimes I'm praying in the car on the way somewhere. Sometimes
yeah,
I get good quiet time in the morning, but I'd say spending time in the Word and prayer are both really, really important to me. And sometimes I forget until some random time in the middle of the day, and I just stop what I'm doing and just talk to God for a minute.
yeah. Well, I appreciate your transparency, brother, because that's part of being on this podcast and the listeners that I have. I'm sure it's all over, right? If we're honest with each other, there's people at different places in their walk. So no, I do appreciate that transparency, and it is a struggle. I think I've been a believer for, a serious believer for almost 30 years. And I can be honest with you, probably only in the last 5 where I felt like that daily discipline, maybe
Yeah,
even the last 4 or 5 has really gotten consistent and rich.
yeah,
And, so you just keep striving. Like you said, you feel that conviction and you push yourself to do better. And,
yeah.
yeah. What,
I was,
what,
I was praying about this it's probably been time flies, 6 to 12 months ago or something. And I was just like, man, it just feels still like discipline, right? Like
yeah.
I'm forcing myself to do it, but
Yep.
I
Yep.
really want to delight in it,
Yes.
not just
Yes.
feel like it's a discipline every day. And so I was praying to God about it, just saying, hey, God, I want to delight in this. I don't want it to feel like it's work that I'm putting in every morning in order to do it. I don't want to feel like I'm rushing through it, just to say that I did it either.
Just
I
check a
want,
box. Yeah.
and and after I got done praying, for whatever reason, I was on my phone. Probably shouldn't have been, right? But I just Googled, I wanted to light in my devotional time or whatever. And the first YouTube video that popped up was a pastor. It was an old video, but he just had this rule of 3 Ds. And he said it starts with discipline. You have to have discipline first. And as you progress with your discipline, it will turn from discipline into desire. And you'll start to want to do it instead of having to do it. And maybe a long time after you have the desire,
Yeah.
you'll go
Yep.
from desire to delight. And,
Yep.
and you won't just want to do it, but you'll delight in it when you do it. So, I'd love to fast forward to being in the delight phase. And honestly, I mean, I do feel the desire more routinely now to do it than the discipline feeling. But I would love to get to the point where I'm just delighting in it and I'm, prioritizing my time accordingly. Like I want more time for this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
work in progress. I'm
Yeah.
work in progress.
No, well, we all are. And yeah, I don't remember why or what happened, but for me, that clicked.
Yeah.
Like I said, probably 5, maybe longer than that. It was before COVID, I don't know, 19 maybe.
Yep.
And just my morning time, especially the prayer time, it just, yeah, it changed. I can remember. And now I'll get up looking forward to it. So I pray the
That's-
same for you. And yeah, what about your church family? What does that look like for you and your family and local church you guys are plugged into?
Yeah, when we moved back to West Michigan from Arizona, we had such a great experience having kind of our own family's church that we said, we're going to look. We never looked, in our life just because I grew up going to the same church. And
Yeah.
so we started praying about it right away. And honestly, I think God led us to the church we were supposed to go to first. So we go to a church called The Bridge. And at first it was in Portage, Michigan. They just created a second campus in our hometown in Vicksburg. But, for a decade, we went there after trying it for the first time. Our first Sunday back, we went there, felt immediately welcomed. Jeff Winkie was a brand new pastor at the time. He welcomed us. We got to know some people that were on staff and some of the local community right away. And we just felt that was where God was calling us. And so we've been there ever since. My wife and kids have been in, children's ministry, volunteer roles and
Yeah.
things ever since. And so we felt like we were getting integrated into the community. And it's just an awesome church. They preach from the word, and their slogan is "Be one, make one." They want to become a disciple, and then make other disciples. And um, it's just been another church experience for me where I felt personally challenged,
Good.
um, and we still love it there. So
Good.
now,
Praise
now
the
we're
Lord.
in the startup phase of a second campus where we're unloading trailers in the morning, 2 hours before services, and doing the setup and tear down in Vicksburg, and that's been a great experience too.
Yeah. That's good. That's a lot of work. We've done that before years ago, and it's tough. A lot of commitment.
It
That's
is.
good.
Yep.
Hey, I want to talk a little bit about leadership. Nate, when you think about leadership, your own leadership, what are a couple of key principles for you that are like foundational that you always go back to for yourself and then when you're mentoring other leaders?
Oh man. I can probably ramble on this a little bit, but I'm not sure that I could list off like a top 10 list for you. I would say first and foremost, my leadership principles come from my faith. And if I'm honest, I believe that morality comes from God to begin with, right? And
Yeah.
so my leadership principles come from doing what's right and doing what's right in the eyes of the Lord. He's my God, so I need to do what's right in His sight first and foremost. And so um, they're highly aligned with my faith. A lot of them come from the military as well. I learned some great leadership in the military that applies to life, not just to the military. But I guess I would say a couple things. One, always put people first. They're your most important and your most valuable resource, asset, whatever it is. It's almost, devalues anyone to put another word on it, but they matter the most. And if you take care of your people and engage your people and have the right people on your teams, then the results, they happen.
It just happens. Yeah.
Secondarily. And
Yep.
so put people first. Integrity matters. Do what's right no matter what. I feel like I've never worked for an organization or been part of an organization as a leader that didn't drive that home really firmly. And, I haven't always been perfect, but what I'll tell you what I've learned over time is that it takes a long time to build trust. And it takes one bad decision, one easy wrong instead of the hard right to break someone's trust.
That's right. Yep.
And it's a
Yep.
lot of work to build it back up again. So
Yeah.
just doing what's right the first time and doing what's right all the way right the first time really matters. And so I stress that with my team as well.
I got to share a story.
Yeah, please.
I got to share a story about you that I have always remembered, and this is probably a random conversation that you don't remember. It talks about your integrity, and I've thought about this many times. When we were working together at Stryker, and in fact, I think someone else told me you said this, so I think this was secondhand. So maybe a legend or a rumor, but I believed it, and I still do. It was annual review time, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's favorite time. And the way it worked at Stryker was the manager would write the review for their employee, but that manager's manager would have to sign off on it, but first and say, okay, yeah, I agree with this or not. And the what I was told was that you had done that, and you would give it to your manager, and your manager was pretty critical and wanted you to make some significant changes, and you said, "It's my signature going on the paper. It's staying the way it is." And that was it. And I was like, man, hell, it's a lot of bravery because, this
Yeah.
is your manager. But that was, Nate, when I think of you, and I think about that probably every year at review time, that memory pops up in my head. So I think about you at least once a year. But, but no, I mean, that was for me, that your integrity has always been something I've seen shine through. This is where you are. This is what you believe, and this is what we're going to do. And you weren't rude about it. You always had that smile on your face, and say, this is it, man. So anyways, I just want to share that story that I always remember about you.
Well, thank you. I probably, hopefully said it politely and
I
didn't put
bet you
my
did.
finger in their face or anything like that. But
Yeah, yeah,
um, you're right. At times you got to stand up for what you believe in and hopefully do it out of love.
yeah.
This doesn't prevent me or anybody else from giving transparent feedback.
Yeah.
But I need to give my feedback, not
That's
somebody
right.
else's.
That's right. I read a book last year. It was called Radical Candor. I don't know
Mm.
if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah. Yep.
It's a really, really good book. And it talks about that whole idea of, like, you can give someone difficult feedback and care about them. I mean, this is really the biblical principle of speaking the truth in love.
Right.
And I care about my team members enough that when they're failing, I need to let them know, and not in a demeaning or disrespectful way. I want them to know where they stand and not surprise them, with firing them or what some other action that they don't know why. Why am I being treated this way? Why am I being demoted? And so I think that's super important to speak the truth in love. And sometimes that truth is difficulty. I've had, and I know you have had to too, terminate people. I've had to let people go, and you still do it in a way that's loving and caring and, respectful of them. Every time I've had to do it, I pray about it before, I pray about it after, I pray about them because I know it's a very, very difficult situation, but it has to happen. So yeah, that level of
Sure.
integrity I think is important. And I think it oftentimes will set a Christian leader apart in the workplace because of that just refusal to do the wrong thing or to, compromise on what's right.
Yeah.
So
We
yeah.
just had a CEO transition in my company. So my boss, the guy who hired me, Pat Byer, is now our CEO. Because this was his first global sales meeting after becoming the CEO, he was up on stage and kind of doing an introduction and, sort of probably setting the tone for his leadership style going forward.
Mhm.
And one thing he said really resonated with me about this topic. And he said, I can like you and hold you accountable.
Yeah.
I can like you and hold you accountable. He's an approachable, likable person who loves to make people smile and laugh. And at the same time, he wants to see results and he's not afraid to give you feedback. And, I aspire to also be able to do that.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's important. And we can do both. We can do both.
Right.
Hey, Nate, when you think back early leadership journey, what was something that you struggled with and have you learned to overcome it? How did you learn to manage it or do you still struggle with it a little bit? What would that look like?
So I'll start with the end, which is I still struggle with it. But I certainly haven't conquered it. You gave me this question in advance, so I had a chance to think about
That's all
it.
right.
I really think this is probably what I would choose to share. I'd say for the majority of my life, I have struggled with feeling like I just didn't measure up, if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
didn't always fit in. I was, at least a year, if not a year and a half younger than most of the kids that were in my grade because I got started a little bit early. And that affected athletics. It affected being accepted by my friends because they were older and kind of the phase that they were moving into, whether it was, being able to go to the mall or get your driver's license
Yeah.
or,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I always wanted to fit in and be accepted. And because that wasn't always the case, I wound up making choices, throughout my life and for a long time, that kind of reflected that desire. It took a lot of growing up and, unfortunately for me, some tough times that were a result of my own decisions as well to get me to understand that I was way too worried about that. And that I am good enough the way that I am and that I'm accepted by God.
Yeah.
And of course, as you get older and you have your own family and things, you can start to get a little bit more comfortable, with yourself as well. But I do struggle with it even now. And as I was thinking about this, Jason, there are really two life experiences that I feel like, and among many, I could talk about this forever. I'm sure most could, right? But two maybe stories that stuck out in my head is, being shaving forces and all this. Maybe more so than I want to admit, but I remember. So my dad was in finance. He passed away during my first deployment when he was 48.
Mm.
But he was always in finance. Worked at Bronson Hospital and then later at Elkhart General Hospital, and he would kind of a white collar job, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he still worked really hard to provide for us. And growing up, we had a very tight extended family. So my favorite people in life were and still are in many cases my uncles and my first cousins. And so we got together on every holiday. We camped together in the summer. We played in Gus Macker basketball tournaments. We you name it, we were together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just love that family. And my uncles were teachers, basketball coaches, undercover police officers. Like that. Man, I looked up to all of them big time, and I really wanted to be accepted by them. And very similarly, right, I was not as good at basketball as my other cousins that were my age. And so like I was always kind of the underdog in all
Yeah.
areas. But I specifically remember a time when we were camping together at a little Christian campground called Cran Hill Ranch that we still go to and absolutely love, and my kids love as well. And I don't remember much of the circumstances around it, but I remember a time when my uncles were making fun of my dad, and they were kind of calling him a nerd and a dork and all, and
Yeah.
everyone was kind of laughing at him, and he was laughing with them, but probably, uncomfortably laughing with them. And then a couple of my cousins chimed in too, right? Their dads were making fun of my dad, so they kind of joined in. And it hurt me, to see my dad get made fun of that way.
Yeah.
And I feel like something in me changed a little bit, in that moment. And I had already experienced that as a kid, right? Being younger and kind of not being accepted. I was watching it happen to my dad, and something clicked in my brain where I just said, I'm not going to let that happen to me. And unfortunately, the way it played out in my life is, more negative than positive over the
Yeah. Yep.
decades, right? Because what it prompted me to do was try to fit in ways that I shouldn't have. And so that's the first story. I guess the second one that shaped me is, years later in high school, another dad story, but my dad was an early riser, had great spiritual disciplines. And so he would usually be reading his Bible at the kitchen table, but he was almost always gone before any of us woke up. So
Yeah.
I knew that he was there. There might be a note at the table every once in a while, but he was usually already gone. And so I walked into the kitchen that morning, and he had just finished his, reading the Bible and praying and things like that. And that morning he just stopped and he closed his Bible and he looked at me, and it was like a more serious look than normal, and he just said, Nate, you're going to be a great leader someday. And for whatever reason, very similar to that moment where, I saw him being made fun of and something clicked in my brain and I can think back to it as a memory.
Yeah.
That has stuck in my brain,
Yeah.
every day for the rest of my life since then. And I think I could write a book on how those two little experiences have shaped me. But I've felt this incredible pressure to live up to his, prophecy that I was going to be a great leader.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I've struggled intensely my entire life with wanting to be liked and accepted. And,
Yeah.
It's played out in just being a chameleon instead of being authentic to who I am, or spending time with the wrong people or at the wrong places or whatever. So that's the leadership struggle I think I've got way better with.
Yeah.
I catch myself in the moment all the time. It's that leadership versus likership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to have that sign on your office wall. We need more leadership and less likership, or something to that effect. I remember that.
Yeah. There was a sign on the Kuwaiti border, as you would, basically they would call it going hot, going red with your weapons. But as you would leave Kuwait into Iraq in the combat zone, there was a sign that said, we need leadership, not likership.
Yeah.
And just a reminder to military leaders that, all of your soldiers' lives are in your hands.
That's right.
It's not about being liked anymore. It's about making the decisions that are right in the moment. And
Yeah.
that stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
good.
do, Jason, I have one other, I would say, and
Go
this
ahead.
past one, but my one other struggle, candidly, is that, like you, I'm an activator and I'm a maximizer. And, so as a leader, the way that plays out, it plays out at home and at work really for me. But um, if I achieve something, I spend less than a millisecond sort of relishing in that. I
On to the
immediately,
next thing.
yeah, I'm like, that's nice. Now it's over. Now what? Right. And so it's either on to thinking about the next thing that I need to get done or accomplish, or it's thinking about what I could have done differently or better to do that thing better, faster, stronger, whatever it might have
Yeah.
been. And so at work as a leader, the way it plays out, is that I really struggle to recognize other people's
Yep.
accomplishments as
Yep.
a leader. And thankfully, as I've grown in my career, I've been able to put people around me and say, "Hey guys, I struggle with this. So I need you to help me with identifying recognition opportunities so that I can do it in the moment, or I can do it in a town hall or whatever." And
Yes. Yes.
that's worked out well. But unfortunately for my direct reports, there's not somebody doing that for them. And so I've always really struggled with stopping to smell the roses for a second and saying, "Hey, you know what, Lisa, you did an amazing job on that marketing campaign, or your team is really engaged right now. And I
Yeah.
want to thank you for all the work that you've been putting into this." And so I work on that a lot, and it plays out in a very similar way at home. You're a leader in the house as well, right? And so
Yep.
I
Yep.
may get into a house that's, I've been away from for 3 days, and I told you my wife works really hard. She's done chores a couple times in the day and ferried kids around, and the house could be spotless, and there could be like dinner in the oven, and I can smell it. And for whatever reason, in the moment, I will say something like, "Hey, why are all the boots not lined up on the front?" Right? Instead of,
Yeah.
"Wow,
Thank you.
it
Yeah.
looks amazing. You must have worked really hard today." And so that
Yeah.
maximizer piece of me is a struggle too.
That's terrible. Yeah, I could share so many stories. When I came to Stryker, it was the first time I ever had leaders around me that really pointed that out. How it was always, why would I recognize, like, that's your job? Let's go
Yeah.
on to the next one, the next one. I mean, it was bad. And
Congratulations, your badge works.
yeah, exactly. And it was Rich DeVault, who was my first manager there, that really taught me about layups, right? I want weekly layups. What does that even mean? I want you guys to tell me all these things that I can recognize on your team. I still do them to this day. I did them today in the town hall with the production team. But I asked
Girls.
my staff, hey, what good, can I recognize from the last month on the team that I'm probably completely oblivious to? And so, yeah, it's ongoing battle. And I
You just want it
definitely,
to come naturally. I want it
I
so
do.
badly,
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And I have really hurt sometimes my family, and I've gotten better at it, but same thing where I walk in and I'm like, why is this? And they're like, did you not see the other 50 things that
Or
you could appreciate us for? So yeah, that's been tough.
can be our own worst enemy at times.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, I want to ask, Nate, how do you strive, and even just practically speaking, how do you honor Christ in your work? What are the things that you try to do to honor you have a job, you're a general manager, you're responsible for a division and leading people and, making numbers. As you do that, how do you try to honor the Lord through that?
Um, probably most simply, is I just try to love people the way that I know Christ loves them. Um, One of my favorite country songs, says, "Always be humble and kind." And, there's a million sayings about it, but it starts with just the way that you treat people. And
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain that anything really good has come from a leadership situation where somebody felt disrespected or you criticize someone in public instead of in private. And so I,
Yeah.
I really try to love people the way that I know that God loves them. And that includes when they're making choices that I don't necessarily agree with. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not for me to judge if it's not in the professional sense, right? So I try to honor them in the little decisions that I make, and I'm probably batting 500, in that. I'm far from perfect, but I do my best to just say little prayers throughout the day and just remind myself, hey, this is going to be tough. Let's make sure that I'm honoring God in this conversation, or this could be an opportunity to share just that, my faith with somebody that I barely know, if this conversation could go well. So, it's probably cliche, but at the end of the day, I want, if I got hit by a bus today and you were to go, to my office and start asking people about me, my dream would be that if you said, hey, tell me about Nate, or did Nate love Jesus? They would say, oh man, absolutely. Nate lived his faith in his work. And I don't know that I always do that, but I try really hard.
Sure. Yep. Yep. No, same thing. Yeah. Especially being a fairly high strung activator, there's times when things aren't going well and say things you shouldn't and lose your cool. And you're like, man, that is not Christ honoring, but yeah.
I did want to get that message across. I just didn't want to get it across that word, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's it. Well, and I think that's part of it too. Your team, I've had to apologize to my team, which are like, I ain't got to apologize for that. And I'm like, no, I want to apologize for that. I shouldn't have said that, or, came off like that. So I think that's part of it. That's a big part of it, knowing the people, knowing that you can ask for forgiveness and can apologize, and that you see that, that you see the fact that, you make those mistakes.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, well said.
Hey, so I believe that, as leaders, we should always be trying to keep ourselves sharp, and whether that's reading, listening to other leaders, any that you'd like to share. I always try to get the names of authors, podcasts, like what do you do to keep yourself sharp?
Well, I think you said you've been doing this podcast for 3 years now, so probably no new names at this point in time, but like we were chatting before you hit record here, I love podcasts. As you do, and I'm on the move a lot. So, from a traveling perspective, it's a lot easier for me to click play on a podcast, knowing that it's a half hour long or whatever, and just feel like I'm developing as a leader and as a disciple, that way. I love Craig Rochelle. I love Abe Stanley. I love Patrick Lencioni, Malcolm Gladwell, some classic, like Zig Ziglar, whatever. I just finished a book. John Eldredge, maybe one of my favorite authors of all time. Not really necessarily a leader, more just man, but, in terms of the subject matter, but just finished a book called Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. And ironically, I was like, this book was so awesome. I sent it to a couple people, and our church started a series on it like 2 weeks later.
Oh, nice. All right.
So I'd say those are the names of just really strong faith-based leaders that I love books from, podcasts from, leader guides along with their podcasts that I like to dive into a little bit. And then maybe one non-faith-based book that I just, it's been with me for my entire career, and you might have read it as well. But I think in the first 30 days that I started at Stryker, the vice president of HR, his name was Jeff, handed me a book called First Break All the Rules.
Yeah.
By Marcus Buckingham and the other guy, but it's just a little thin book, but just some really powerful leadership principles in there that kind of changed the way that I thought about leadership really early on in my career. And I've kind of applied a lot of those lessons, still today.
Yeah. I think that must have been mandatory reading at Stryker. I got that one too.
We had to buy 30,000 books a year or something.
That and taking the Strengths Finder. That was That was the big one. And I still recommend that. I do that with my team. The DISC or the Strengths Finder is something I always encourage people to do to learn about their own, personalities and styles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, if you had someone sit down with you, Nate, let's say they're, whatever, in an individual contributor role, and they get their first role managing people, and they say, Nate, I know you have experience doing this. I'll buy you a coffee. Let's sit down and give me your best advice. What kind of advice would you give someone moving into their first leadership role?
Yeah. At least for me, I've always just kind of prescribed by the just do really good at the job you're in now, mindset. I feel like there are a lot of people, and it's like my mind went here even when you said, hey, young leader wants to have coffee. So many times it's like they're asking all these questions like they're ready for the next job and they want to do the next thing as fast as possible. And at least for me personally, in my whole career, I never applied for a job, not one. Um, because I was just focused on doing the right thing in my current job. And then somebody
Yeah.
came up at some point in time and said, "Hey, would you consider this job?" And, and so I think that's important. Just do a good job at the thing that you're asked to do and be a good leader with the people that you're trusted to lead.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to notice, and then you're going to get the next opportunity. But in terms of like, more stylistic or, character types things, I just say, don't try to be perfect. It's a waste of time, and, try to be authentic, so being true to yourself and sort of, on the scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is like, I'm my authentic person, no matter where I'm at work and at home and at school and, with my friends and with the board and anybody else, and 10 being a chameleon. And I just adapt to whatever environment that I'm in. I- you know, do you have to adjust, or read the room a little bit if it's a formal situation? Yes. But I think in general, you want to be on the authentic side of the scale. And I think that's something that's important.
Yeah.
More now than ever, right? And, in leadership today. So, and, and I guess the last thing is, everyone gets better when the leader gets better. I hear Craig Rochelle and Andy Stanley saying that a lot on leaders,
Yep.
podcasts. Don't be afraid to work on yourself, or to take that half hour, that 1 hour time block, a week or every other week to go, I'm going to work on me, because
Yeah.
to become a better leader, my team's going to become a better team, and we're
Yeah.
going to reach better results. So you got to work on you as well.
Good. I like it. I can't even recently I had this conversation. I've had many of them in my career where I'll have somebody come and ask about that next promotion and that next thing. And I've had to say too many times, you're not performing in your current role
Yeah.
very well. So let's focus on that. I just had this conversation with someone recently, and they took it very well, and we saw some positive response from them. And it was that mentality. And actually, they said the words, which I responded maybe more bluntly than I should have, but they said basically, once I get the promotion, then I'll start doing that other stuff you're looking for. And I'm like, you will never,
Yeah.
never get the promotion if you're on my team with
Yeah.
that mindset.
Doesn't work.
So yeah, I think, that's super key, is go just perform with excellence. And, it goes back to the very, much a biblical principle that, who's faithful in little will be faithful in much.
Yeah.
And,
You know, one of the things that I don't do well all the time, but that I feel, when you think about your approach to leadership and those kind of tough conversations and stuff, if I reflect back and go, why did that one go well and this other one that I'm thinking of not go well? It's usually because I ask good questions, and so instead of me, and I am ultra transparent to a fault, right? Instead of me just offering my opinion right from the start, saying, how do you think that went? Or, you know, have you looked at your objectives lately? How do you think you're doing to them, or whatever? Just letting them reflect on their own performance,
yeah,
their own, potential and all that kind of stuff. Eventually it comes back around where they want to know, well, how do you think, and you have an opportunity. But I feel like when I do that well, from a leadership perspective, the conversations go better.
yeah.
I still get my chance to say what I want. So maybe that's another little nugget there.
No, that's a good nugget, and that's something I don't do well, because that's probably that activator in me. I just got to say it and get it out there. And so I
Right.
think that's something I could probably do a better job, is ask, because I when I have, like, many times that person is either at where I'm at, they'll admit, maybe we're aligned, or at least they're close to it. And so allowing them to walk through that, and probably then your delivery doesn't feel maybe as much like blunt force trauma when they've
Yeah.
openly said
Um,
there's a gap.
I'm, all over the place, right? I'm hearing
Yeah, go ahead.
squirrels
That's
and
good.
shiny things and all that kind of stuff. But the one other thing that just crossed my mind. So I was an aide de camp in between my two Iraq deployments for a, special forces general officer. So I traveled all over the place with him. I got to where we were going before him, left after him, and, it was a hugely developmental experience. But it was the first time that I sort of recognized this concept that it gets lonely at the top,
Yeah.
And so this guy who's a brigade commander in charge of thousands of troops, in harm's way, man, it's really lonely. You don't get to spend a lot of time with too many people. And the reality is it's almost like when HR walks into the room, people are like, oh, HR's here, and they all kind of go away.
Yeah.
When you're a leader, you got to have community, right? And so I'm not applying that just to somebody at the general level, right? That's any leader, but I feel like you really have to work hard to make sure that you're connecting with people who can be accountability partners for you and
Yeah.
challenge you in the way you're thinking. And that's been really important in my life, and probably something I didn't do well early. So if it was a younger leader, I would say, hey, get yourself a few other leaders that you like and get along with and also see are talented and going somewhere, and talk to each other once a week and hold each other accountable. It's almost like those 20 groups or those max groups,
Yeah.
push each other to be better.
Yep. Yep. And someone you can be pretty vulnerable with and have the conversations that you sometimes can't with your team, the person you're leading. So
Totally.
yeah, that's good. Any ideas on who else you'd like to see come on the podcast? You thought about that?
Man. I could run through a whole bunch of names, but guess what? I told you a story about my uncles and cousins, and like my thought immediately goes back to uncles and cousins. And so
Yeah.
um, I have an uncle named Jerry Brower who built what I think may be one of the largest Mastercraft boat dealerships in the country, if not the world. And he's an amazing Christian leader who's really built a strong, successful business, but also just found a way to incorporate faith into all of it.
Awesome.
He's just a really cool guy to talk to, and
Yeah.
we do 100 times better than me on a podcast like this. So, I mean, he's one. And my cousin Dan has been an accountability partner for me for, I think we're probably going on 3 years now.
Okay.
Worked
Nice.
in the insurance industry. He's a leader, and we talk every Monday morning. And we focus on being more encouraging husbands, and
Yeah.
sort of like softening our hearts at home. And that's what we started with. But then we talk about work and leading, and all the other things going on in our lives. He's an amazing guy too. You'd love to have him,
Great.
on your podcast. And
That'd be great. Yeah. I'd be honored if you would maybe make an email connection or something. Once you find out if they're open to it, that'd be great.
absolutely,
I appreciate
yeah,
it.
yeah, me have to.
Hey, you talked a little bit about this already, Nate, but like when you and I are both a ways away from retirement. I hope we got maybe a decade or two ahead of us. But when you're done, when that time's over, or even just if you move to a different role, how do you hope people will remember you, and like what's that legacy that you hope to leave behind?
It's weird. I listened to your most recent podcast, and I've already forgotten the gentleman's name. The Line Within podcast.
Yes. Yes.
And he made a comment on that, that the reality is that your legacy is almost like we believe our legacy lasts way longer than it really does. Right.
That's right. Yep. No, it was good. Yep.
Yeah. And that really hit me, so my dad passed away when he was 48. My son is 11, never had a chance to meet my dad. My legacy is gone when my kids who never knew him, you know what I mean, are growing up and getting older. I mean, that generation, his legacy is already gone. Now,
you'll be the last person you'll be the last generation to remember him.
Yeah. And all of a sudden it put into perspective, wait a minute, okay, so I've read, The Legacy Journey, and some books that talk about a financial legacy that maybe you could send your grandchildren to college or something and help them start off on a better foot than maybe you did. And so I think about that every once in a while. But yesterday's time here and that really hit me. And I think, you know what, at the end of the day, one of the things I think about constantly is this juxtaposition of achievement and feeling like I'm called to be a leader with also what the Bible says, which is to live a humble life and please the Lord. And basically, if you're loving your neighbor, living a humble life, then people who get to know you and they see your good works will go, what is it about that person?
Yeah.
That makes them happy and fulfilled and not anxious and things like that. And that is probably what will make them want to understand why you are the way you are and give you an opportunity to share your faith. And maybe, they'll come to know Jesus also as a result of it. So when I think about like when my time as a leader is done, I'm like, well, maybe then is when I'm supposed to live a a humble and quiet life. I don't know, but I hope that the way that I've impacted people is just that I've loved my neighbor,
Yeah.
um, loved people the way that Jesus loves them. And hopefully when the opportunity comes throughout my day-to-day interactions with them, I find ways to sprinkle in my faith.
Yeah.
Maybe they get a little bit interested, but I think Billy Graham said, um, you know, he's had the privilege or had the privilege, right, of getting so many people from, the 99-yard line over into the end zone to become believers. But the reality is that all of us may never know how we impacted somebody, because you
Right.
may have
Yeah.
worked an interest or gotten them from the
Yep.
1 line to the 2-yard line, but that was God's plan. And so I hope that I impacted a whole bunch of people, even if they, didn't get into the end zone. I hope they thought, they thought
Yep.
something or became more interested and learned about Jesus, and maybe somebody else took them the rest of the way.
Yeah. I think Paul wrote in one of his letters that it talks about that some of us plant and some of us water, but
Right.
it's the Lord who takes the harvest. So if we're being
Right.
faithful in that, that's all we can do is be faithful, and what the Holy Spirit does with that is that's up to him. So, hey, brother, before we wrap up, if somebody wants to connect with you, what's a good way to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn, just
Yeah.
under my name, Nate Miersma. And I'm happy to give maybe that's the way to do it. Reach out through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to give my personal email. And I would love to connect with other Christian leaders, who want
That's
to
right.
talk more about this.
Yeah. And spell your last name.
It is Miersma.
Yeah. So they can find you on LinkedIn. I always can't remember if it's EI or IE. So that's good. That's good. Hey, man, thank you for your time. And you have been an inspiration to me over the years. And I mean that. I mean, I've really respected you as a leader. And I also want to thank you for your service. And I don't just say that as a platitude. I thank you and Danielle for the sacrifice that you guys have made for our country. Really. I mean, I think about there I was working through my career and doing my stuff, and you were overseas fighting for our nation. So thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. This was a
Yeah.
great experience.
All right, man. Take care.